They buried my son on a Tuesday, but I knew something was wrong when I saw his wife smirk. She inherited the mansion and a company worth tens of millions of dollars. I got a rusted truck from the 90s. But she forgot that for engineers, real value is hidden. When I found secret GPS coordinates in that old truck, I uncovered a truth that made them wish they had killed me too. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. Because what I found was more terrifying than death itself. My name is Joseph Brown, and if there is one thing I learned after 40 years of cracking safes for ironclad security, it is that the toughest locks are never on the steel doors. The hardest things to read are always human faces, specifically the faces of those who think they have gotten away with something. I stood there on the manicured grass of Oakwood Memorial, the wind biting through my wool coat, watching the woman who had married my son bury him. Sarah looked the part. She was wearing a black dress that I knew cost more than my monthly pension, cut modestly enough for a funeral, but tight enough to remind everyone that she was young, beautiful, and now tragically available. She held a lace handkerchief to her eyes, dabbing at tears that seemed to appear on cue. To the 100 or so people gathered there, tech investors, employees from Nexus Logic, and neighborhood friends, she was the picture of a grieving widow. She was a masterpiece of sorrow. But I was not looking at the performance. I was looking at the mechanism. For 4 decades, my job was to walk into a room, look at a vault that people claimed was impenetrable, and find the hairline fracture, the one loose tumbler, the single point of failure. You do not do that job without learning how to look past the surface. You learn that a safe that looks too shiny is often compensating for weak hinges. You learn that silence is often more telling than noise. And right now, watching Sarah, I saw the tumblers moving. I saw the way her gaze shifted, just for a fraction of a second, away from the mahogany casket and toward the back of the crowd. It was a quick, sharp dart of the eyes, locking onto a target, and then snapping back to the grave. I followed the line of sight. Marcus. Marcus was standing under a large oak tree, his hands clasped solemnly in front of him. He was Liam's business partner, the legal mind behind Nexus Logic, and the man my son had trusted with his life's work. Marcus looked devastated. He wiped his face with a hand that looked like it was trembling. But when Sarah's eyes met his, the trembling stopped. It was a micro-transaction of information, a signal. It was the same look a thief gives his lookout when the vault door finally swings open. I tightened my grip on my umbrella handle. The anger in my chest was a cold, heavy stone, but I kept my face blank. I was 72 years old, a retired technician with calloused hands and a bank account that barely covered the heating bill. To them, I was just Joseph, the old man who fixed things, the father who had outlived his brilliant son. They thought I was broken. They thought I was senile or too blinded by grief to see the geometry of their betrayal. I let them think it. In my line of work, being underestimated is the best tool in the box. The service ended with the usual platitudes. The minister spoke about Liam's brilliance, his kindness, his patents that had changed the landscape of digital security. I listened to the words, but I heard the silence of my son, my Liam. The boy who used to sit on the concrete floor of my garage, handing me wrenches before he could even walk properly. They talked about the CEO of Nexus Logic. I remembered the boy who built a birdhouse with a hidden compartment because he wanted the birds to be safe from cats. "Joseph," a voice said softly beside me. I turned to see Sarah. She had approached me while I was lost in memory. Up close, her makeup was flawless. There was no puffiness around the eyes, no blotchiness that comes from real gut-wrenching sobbing. "I am so sorry, Dad," she said, reaching out to take my hand. Her skin was cool. "The lawyer wants us to meet at the office in an hour, to read the will. I know it is soon, but Marcus says it is better to get the legalities over with so we can start to heal." "Of course," I said, my voice sounding rusty like an old hinge. "Whatever is best, Sarah." She squeezed my hand, a gesture that felt as empty as the air. "Liam loved you so much. You know that, right?" I know, I said. And I did. I knew my son. And because I knew my son, I knew he would never have left me alone in a room with these sharks without a weapon. I just had to find it. The office of Marcus and Associates was located downtown in a building of glass and steel that screamed modern success. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. I sat in a chair that was too soft, sinking into it, making me look smaller, more fragile. Sarah sat opposite me, flanked by Marcus. They looked like a power couple posing for a magazine cover, though they maintained a respectful distance between their chairs. Marcus cleared his throat. He opened a thick leather folder. The sound of the papers rustling was the only noise in the room. "This is never easy," Marcus said, his voice smooth, practiced. Liam was my best friend, but he was also a man of detail. He wanted to make sure everything was clear. I nodded slowly, staring at the polished table surface. "Read it, Marcus," he began. The legal language was dense, designed to obscure as much as it revealed, but the numbers cut through the fog like a torch. "To my loving wife Sarah," Marcus read, and I saw Sarah straighten her spine slightly. "I leave the entirety of my shares in Nexus Logic, comprising 51% of the company stock. 51% control. Absolute control. That company was worth tens of millions of dollars. I also leave the property at 104 Mountain View Drive in Aspen, Colorado," Marcus continued. "The vacation home. Another $3 or $4 million right there." And Marcus paused for effect, glancing at Sarah, with a look that was supposed to be supportive, but looked purely greedy to my eyes, the payout of his life insurance policy, totaling $5 million. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the corner of the room, where Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor who had driven me, was sitting. She was shocked. In our world, in the neighborhood where I raised Liam, money like that was imaginary. It was lottery money. Sarah let out a small, trembling sigh and covered her mouth. "Oh, Liam," she whispered. "I would trade it all to have him back." Liar, I thought. "You would not trade a cent." "And for my father," Marcus said, shifting his weight. His tone changed. It became dismissive, the way one might talk about donating old clothes to charity. "Joseph Brown," I looked up. This was it. "To my father, who taught me the value of working with my hands," Marcus read, "I leave my 1996 Ford Bronco." The silence that followed was heavy, thick, and suffocating. I blinked. "The Bronco?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Yes," Marcus said, sliding a set of keys across the polished mahogany table. They clattered loudly, a harsh metallic sound in the quiet room. "The 1996 model. I believe Liam bought it a few months ago as a project car. He mentioned he wanted to restore it." I looked at the keys. They were attached to a simple plastic tag that said, Ford. Sarah leaned forward, her face arranging itself into a mask of pity that was thinly veiling her amusement. "Liam knew how much you like tinkering with old things, Dad," she said. He probably thought it would give you something to do, a hobby, to keep you busy so you do not have to think about everything else." The insult was precise. It was surgical. She was not just giving me a junk car, she was telling me that my value in Liam's eyes was nothing more than an old man who needed a distraction. She was taking the millions, the company, the legacy, and handing me a pile of rust, because she thought that was all I was capable of handling. "I see," I said. I reached out and took the keys. My hand did not shake. "Is that it?" Mrs. Henderson asked from the corner, her voice rising in indignation. "Warren was a good father. He worked double shifts to put that boy through MIT, and he leaves him a used truck." "It is what is in the will, Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said coldly. "We must respect the deceased's wishes." "It is fine, Helen," I said, silencing her with a look. "It is fine." I saw the look Sarah gave Marcus then. It was a smirk. A tiny, self-satisfied curling of the lip. She thought she had won. She thought she had stripped the carcass clean and tossed the bones to the dog. She thought I was humiliated. But as I held those keys, I felt something else. I felt the weight of them. I thought about Liam. My son was an engineer. He was a man who built logic gates and encryption algorithms. He did not do things by accident. He did not buy a 1996 Bronco just to drive around. And he certainly would not have left it to me as a mere hobby, without a reason. Liam knew I did not need charity. He knew I needed answers. "If there is nothing else," I said, standing up. My knees popped a sound of old age that made Marcus wince slightly. "I will take the truck. It is parked in the garage downstairs," Marcus said, closing the folder. "I will have the title transfer paperwork sent to your house." "You do that," I said. I walked out of that office without looking back. I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel the pity of the receptionist, the disdain of the junior partners who saw an old man in a cheap suit, walking away with nothing. They saw a victim. They saw a loser. I took the elevator down to the parking garage. The air was stale and smelled of exhaust and concrete. I walked through the rows of gleaming Mercedes and BMWs, the cars of the successful, the cars of the people who had just robbed my son's legacy. And there it was. Parked in the far corner, under a flickering fluorescent light, sat the Bronco. It was white, or at least it had been white once. Now it was a map of rust spots and primer. The bumper was dented. The tires looked worn. It was a beast of a machine, boxy and unapologetic, looking completely out of place among the sleek luxury sedans. I walked up to it. I ran my hand along the fender. The metal was cold and rough. "A project," I muttered to myself. "Is that what you are, son, a project?" I put the key in the lock. It turned with a satisfying mechanical click, a sound I had loved all my life. The door groaned as I pulled it open. The interior smelled of old leather, stale pine air freshener, and something else. Something familiar. It smelled like motor oil and solder. It smelled like Liam. I climbed into the driver's seat. The upholstery was cracked. The dashboard was dusty. It was a wreck. Sarah was right. To the naked eye, this was junk. It was a slap in the face. But as I sat there gripping the worn steering wheel, I let my eyes scan the vehicle with the precision of a technician. I looked at the panel gaps. I looked at the screws holding the dashboard in place. I looked at the way the carpet met the door frame. I was not just a father grieving. I was Joseph Brown, formerly of Ironclad Security, and I knew that the strongest safes often looked like ordinary filing cabinets. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine did not just start, it roared. It caught, instantly settling into a deep, rhythmic rumble that shook the frame. It was not the wheezing cough of a dying engine. It was the powerful, tuned growl of a machine that had been rebuilt with obsessive care. I listened to the idle. It was perfect. Too perfect for a truck this old. The timing was exact. The valves were singing in harmony. "Hello, beautiful," I whispered, a sad smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the exit ramp. The exhaust echoed off the concrete walls, a defiant shout in the quiet garage. I drove out into the gray afternoon light, leaving the skyscraper and the millions of dollars behind me. Let them have the money. Let them have the house in Aspen. Let them have the shares. They were fighting over the wrapping paper, and they had thrown away the gift. As I merged into traffic, feeling the raw power of the engine beneath my feet, I knew two things for certain. First, my son had not died in an accident. A man who could tune an engine this perfectly, who paid this much attention to detail, did not just lose his brakes on a mountain road. And second, this truck was not a parting gift. It was a toolbox. And I was the only one with the skills to open it. I glanced at the passenger seat, empty, except for a few fast food wrappers. "All right, Liam," I said aloud, my voice thick with emotion but steady with resolve. Let us see what you left for me." I drove toward home, the city blurring past me, the weight of my grief slowly hardening into something sharper, something dangerous. I was an old man, yes, but I was an old man with a very specific set of skills, and I had just been handed a puzzle that I intended to solve piece by bloody piece. The drive back to my bungalow in the quiet suburbs of Chicago was a blur of gray highway and white noise, but my mind was sharpening with every mile. I pulled the 1996 Bronco into my driveway as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. I did not park it in the driveway. I hit the button for the garage door opener, watching the aluminum barrier roll up slowly, revealing my sanctuary. My garage was not a storage space for Christmas decorations or bicycles. It was a workshop. It was a clean room. The concrete floor was painted a sterile gray and polished until you could eat off it. My tools were organized on pegboards and in red metal chests, arranged not just by size, but by frequency of use. The air here always smelled of 10-weight motor oil sawdust and the sharp metallic tang of machined steel. It was the smell of order. It was the smell of truth. Out there in the funeral home and the lawyer's office, the world was messy and full of lies. In here, a bolt either fit or it did not. A circuit was either closed or open. There was no ambiguity in mechanics. I drove the Bronco inside and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a comfortable weight. I stepped out and locked the garage door behind me, engaging the heavy deadbolt. I was alone with the puzzle. I did not start by tearing the truck apart. That is the mistake of an amateur. You do not breach a safe by drilling the first spot you see. You survey. You analyze. You listen to the tumblers. I walked around the vehicle, running my hand along the quarter panels. The rust was real enough on the surface, bubbling under the white paint near the wheel wells, but the frame felt solid. I grabbed a creeper from the wall, lay down on it, and slid underneath the chassis. This was the first anomaly. The undercarriage of a 30-year-old truck that had spent its life in the salt belt of the Midwest should have been a disaster zone of corrosion. But as I shined my high-lumen tactical light along the frame rails, I saw fresh black coating. It was not just spray paint, it was a high-grade rubberized undercoating, the kind we use to apply to armored transport vehicles to dampen the blast from road mines. The suspension components were not stock either. The control arms were reinforced steel, and the shock absorbers were heavy-duty off-road gas shocks, painted black to look like standard equipment, but clearly rated for much heavier loads. Liam had not just restored this truck. He had fortified it. I slid back out, my heart rate steady, but my mind racing. I popped the hood. The engine block was clean, free of the usual grime. The wiring loom was wrapped in high-heat Tessa tape, executed with a precision that bordered on obsessive. This was not the work of a weekend hobbyist. This was the work of a lead engineer. I moved to the interior. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the dashboard. It was a landscape of cheap plastic and analog gauges typical for the 90s, but my eyes were drawn to the center console. There was a GPS unit mounted there, an old bulky model that looked like it belonged in the early 2000s. It looked like an afterthought, something slapped on with double-sided tape. But when I tried to wiggle it, it did not move. It was bolted from the rear. "All right, Liam," I whispered. "Show me the schematic." I went to my toolbox and retrieved a set of Torx screwdrivers and a plastic pry tool. I began the process of dismantling the dashboard. I worked with the muscle memory of 40 years. Remove the trim panel. Unscrew the 4 mounting bolts holding the instrument cluster. Disconnect the heater controls. Each click of a plastic clip releasing felt like I was picking a lock layer by layer. When I finally pulled the main dashboard bezel free, I saw it. The wiring harness behind the GPS unit was not standard. In a stock vehicle, you would expect a simple 12-volt power wire and a ground. What I was looking at was a chaotic yet beautifully organized nest of wires. They were spliced into the vehicle's main computer, the odometer, and even the ignition sequence. I leaned in closer, adjusting my spectacles. The soldering work was exquisite. Each connection was heat-shrunk and labeled with tiny white tags. But it was the configuration that stopped my breath. The wires were routed in a dual-loop circuit. I recognized this immediately. I had taught Liam this exact configuration when he was 12 years old, and we were building a remote-controlled gate for the backyard. It was a negative trigger relay system, commonly known in the security industry as a dead man's switch. A dead man's switch is designed to trigger an event only when a specific condition is met, or more often when a continuous signal is interrupted. It is a failsafe. It is what you build when you are afraid you might not be there to push the button yourself. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the realization of what my son had been thinking when he installed this. He knew. He knew he was in danger. He had built a ghost in the machine. I traced the wires. They led into the back of the GPS unit. This was not just a navigation device. It was a terminal. The casing was old, but the guts had likely been gutted and replaced with something far more powerful. I needed to wake it up. I reconnected the battery terminal I had disconnected for safety. I sat back in the driver's seat and inserted the key. I turned it to the accessory position. The dashboard lights flickered on. The radio crackled with static. The bulky GPS screen remained black for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I held my breath. Then a single pixel lit up in the center. Then another. The screen washed out in a pale blue glow, but instead of the manufacturer's logo, or a map, a simple command prompt appeared. Enter security pin. It was a 6-digit field. I stared at the blinking cursor. This was the lock, the final tumbler. I tried the obvious first. Liam's birthday, March 15th, 1986. I typed in 031586. Access denied. The letters flashed red, angry and sharp. I wiped my palms on my trousers. Think Joseph. Think like him. Sarah would have tried his birthday. Marcus would have tried his social security number or the date of his wedding. Liam would never use those. He hated predictable passwords. He used to lecture me about entropy and brute force attacks. I tried the date his mother died. Margaret passed away on November 2nd, 2018. 110218. Access denied. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. "Come on, son," I hissed. "Talk to me." I closed my eyes, letting the smell of the garage and the hum of the active electronics wash over me. I tried to recall our last conversation. It was 2 days before the accident. He had called me late at night. He sounded tired, his voice tight with a stress he refused to explain. We had talked about the Tigers game, about the weather, superficial things. But right before he hung up, the conversation had shifted. I had told him to get some rest, to stop worrying about the shareholders. And he had said, "Dad, sometimes safety standards matter more than profit. Remember the first rule you taught me?" I opened my eyes. The first rule. It was not a rule about life. It was a rule about patents. When I filed my very first patent for the triple locking bolt mechanism that Ironclad still uses today, I was so proud. I had framed the approval letter. Liam used to stare at it when he was a boy, tracing the numbers with his finger. We used that number for everything. It was the code for the garage door. It was the combination for his bicycle lock. It was the numeric symbol of the moment I became not just a laborer, but an inventor. The patent number was U.S. Patent 597482. But we never used the whole thing. We used the approval date. October 4th, 1999. The day the patent was granted. The day he told me he wanted to be an engineer just like me. My finger hovered over the touchscreen. It felt cold. I pressed the numbers. 1, 0, 0, 4, 9, 9. I hit enter. The screen went black instantly. For a terrifying second, I thought I had triggered a data wipe. I thought I had failed him. But then a green line traced across the screen. The old LCD display struggled to render the high-resolution image that was being fed to it. A map appeared. It was not a street map. It was a topographic map, detailed and dense with elevation lines. It zoomed out, showing the outline of the state of Montana. It zoomed in again, focusing on a remote sector in the northern wilderness near the Canadian border. A single red dot pulsed at a specific set of coordinates: 48 degrees north, 114 degrees west. Below the coordinates, a text box appeared. The font was stark military style. Status: active protocol, unmanned delivery recipient, Warren Parker. My breath caught in my throat. Warren Parker. That was my middle name, the name only he and Margaret used when they were teasing me, or being incredibly serious. But it was the message below that made the blood run cold in my veins. Message: the vault is compromised. Do not trust the keys. Go to the coordinates. Bring the truck. Come alone. I stared at the words until they blurred. The vault is compromised. That was industry speak. It meant the secure location, the company, his home, his life had been breached. Do not trust the keys. I looked down at the key in the ignition. He did not mean the car keys. He meant the digital keys, the access codes, the passwords. Everything Sarah and Marcus now controlled was a trap. And then, the final line flickered onto the screen. Audio file detected. Playing. I did not have to press anything. The speakers, which I had assumed were stock and tinny, crackled with a clarity that startled me. "Dad," Liam's voice filled the small cabin of the truck. It was not the confident voice of the CEO. It was the hurried, hushed tone of a man looking over his shoulder. "If you are hearing this, then the dead man's switch triggered. That means I have not entered the reset code in 7 days. That means, well, you know what that means." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Hearing his voice was like a physical blow. "I do not have much time," the recording continued. "I found something, Dad. In the source code. Marcus and Sarah. They are not just greedy. It is worse. They are selling the backdoor access. They are selling the skeleton keys to every bank, every hospital, every government server Nexus Logic protects. I tried to stop them, but they boxed me in." There was a pause, and I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. "I hid the evidence," Liam said. "I could not keep it on the cloud. They own the cloud. I had to put it somewhere offline, somewhere analog, somewhere nobody would look because they think it is just junk." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "This truck isn't a project, Dad. It is the safe. And you are the only one who can transport it. I need you to take it to the coordinates. There is a facility there, an old mining outpost I bought under a shell company. I set up a server there that can decrypt the drive. But the drive is with you." I looked around the cabin frantically, where I had stripped the dash. I had checked the glove box. "Do not look for it," Liam's voice said as if he could see me. "You will not find it. Not yet. Just drive. Get to Montana, and Dad, watch your mirrors. If they find out what I did, if they realize the truck is not empty, they will come for you. Self-preservation, Dad. Remember what you taught me about the cornered animal. It fights the hardest." The recording ended with a sharp click. The screen returned to the pulsing red dot on the map of Montana. I sat there in the silence of my garage, the smell of oil and old leather filling my nose. The grief that had been drowning me for weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was not a tragedy anymore. This was a mission. They thought they had buried my son. They thought they had sidelined me with a piece of junk. But Liam had turned his death into an operation, and he had activated his best asset: me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. I removed the battery and the SIM card. I placed them on the workbench and smashed them with a ball-peen hammer until they were nothing but plastic shards and silicon dust. Then I walked over to the wall where I kept my heavy equipment. I took down the tire iron. I took down the box of emergency flares. I reached for the lockbox on the top shelf, spun the dial, and removed my .38 caliber revolver. I checked the cylinder. It was full. I walked back to the truck. The unmanned delivery message was still blinking a red beacon in the dim light. "Message received, son," I said into the darkness. "Delivery is en route." I did not know what waited for me in the mountains of Montana. I did not know how many men Marcus would send when he realized his mistake. But as I looked at the reinforced frame of the Bronco and the complex wiring of the dead man's switch, I knew one thing. I was not just a grieving father anymore. I was the courier. And God help anyone who tried to stop the delivery. Preparation is the difference between a successful operation and a shallow grave. That was the motto at Ironclad Security, and it echoed in my mind as I moved through my silent house. I did not pack clothes for a vacation. I packed for a deployment. Into an old canvas duffel bag went 3 pairs of wool socks, thermal underwear, a heavy flannel jacket, and a waterproof tarp. But the real packing happened at the workbench in the garage. I selected my tools with the same care a surgeon selects scalpels. A high-tensile bolt cutter, a diamond-tipped drill bit set, a fiber optic inspection camera, and my lockpick set a custom leather roll containing 24 picks of hardened steel, filed down by my own hand over 3 decades. These were not just tools. They were the keys to the world. I reached for the .38 special revolver I had taken from the lockbox. It was a Smith & Wesson Model 10, heavy and cold. It had 6 rounds in the cylinder. I grabbed a box of 50 hollow-point rounds and dropped them into the side pocket of the bag. I hoped I would not need them. I prayed I would not need them. But Liam's message had been clear. The vault was compromised. Before I could leave, I had to secure my perimeter. I walked next door to Mrs. Henderson's house. She was in her garden, deadheading her roses. "Good morning, Helen," I called out, forcing a smile that felt tight on my face. She looked up, beaming. "Joseph, you look like you are going somewhere." "Just a little fishing trip," I lied, smoothly. Lying is easy when you treat it like a security protocol. You just present the expected credential. "Up to Lake Geneva for a few days. The silence of the house. It is getting to be a bit much." Her face softened into that pitying look I was beginning to hate. "Oh, of course, Warren. It will do you good. Fresh air. Do not worry about the house. I will water the plants and bring in the mail." "Thank you, Helen. You are a saint." I was walking back to my front door when the landline rang. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorknob. It could be a telemarketer. It could be the lawyer. Or it could be her. I picked up the receiver in the kitchen. "Hello, Dad." It was Sarah. Her voice was syrupy, laced with that performative concern. "Oh, hello, Sarah," I said, pitching my voice a little higher, a little shakier. I let a slight tremor enter my hand. I was just looking for my glasses. I cannot seem to find them anywhere." "You are sounding a little confused, Dad," she said. "Are you eating? Are you taking your blood pressure medication?" Yes, I muttered, playing the part of the fading old man. "I am fine, just tired. I think I might go lie down for a while, turn off the phone. I need some quiet." "That is a good idea," she said. "You rest. Marcus and I are just so worried about you living in that big house all alone. We were talking and we really think we should look into some assisted living facilities. Just for a tour. No pressure." The rage flared in my gut, hot and acidic. Assisted living. That was their code for prison. That was their way of removing the last obstacle. "We can talk about that next week, dear," I said, my voice feeble. "I am very tired now." "Okay, Dad. Sleep well." I hung up the phone. The tremor in my hand vanished instantly. "Sleep well," I whispered to the empty room. "You are the one who should be worried about sleeping, Sarah." 10 minutes later, I was on the interstate heading west. The drive to Montana was a brutal 20-hour endurance test. The landscape of America unrolled outside my window, like a vast, changing tapestry. I left the flat, gray industrial sprawl of Chicago behind, trading it for the endless cornfields of Iowa, and then the rolling golden plains of Nebraska. The Bronco was a revelation. On the surface, to the cars passing me, it was just an old, white heap of junk. But under my hands and feet, it was a precision instrument. Liam had tuned the suspension so perfectly that the truck glided over potholes that would have rattled my teeth in a modern sedan. The engine hummed with a low, potent baritone note. At 70 miles per hour, the temperature gauge sat dead center and never moved a millimeter. I stopped only for gas and black coffee. I slept for 4 hours in a rest stop parking lot in South Dakota, curled up in the back seat with my hand resting on the revolver. I watched the truckers and the weary travelers, wondering if any of them were watching me. Paranoia is an occupational hazard in the security business, but now it felt like a survival instinct. By the time I crossed the state line into Montana, the world had changed. The horizon was no longer a flat line. It was jagged, torn upward by the teeth of the Rocky Mountains. The air grew thinner, sharper. It smelled of pine resin and cold stone. I followed the highway until it became a state road, and the state road until it became a county route. The GPS unit on the dashboard, the one Liam had rigged, guided me with silent, glowing arrows. It took me off the pavement and onto a gravel fire road that wound its way up into the dense national forest. The isolation was absolute. There were no other cars here, no houses, just trees, millions of them standing like silent sentinels on the slopes. The gravel crunched loudly under my tires, the only sound in the vast wilderness. Then the technology died. I watched the signal bars on the GPS unit drop one by one. 3 bars, 2 bars, 1, then a red X. The digital map froze. "All right," I said to the empty cabin. "Going dark." I reached into the passenger seat and unfolded the paper topographic maps I had bought at a gas station 300 miles back. I had marked the coordinates Liam gave me with a red pen. I checked the odometer. I checked the compass mounted on the dashboard. I was navigating the old way now. Dead reckoning. Distance over time. The road narrowed until it was barely a track overgrown with brush that scraped against the sides of the Bronco like skeletal fingers. The incline became steep. I shifted the transfer case into 4-wheel drive low. The truck lurched forward, climbing over rocks and washouts with the stubborn determination of a mountain goat. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and orange when I saw it. A rusted metal sign riddled with bullet holes hung crookedly from a tree. "Danger. Abandoned mine. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." It was the perfect cover. Who would wander into an abandoned mine? Teenagers maybe, or lost hikers. But no serious person. No police patrol. I stopped the truck. I killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was deafening. I rolled down the window and listened. I was listening for the sound of another engine, the snap of a twig, the unnatural rustle of nylon against leaves. Nothing but the wind in the pines. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the perimeter. To the untrained eye, it was just forest. But I knew what to look for. I looked for straight lines in a world of curves. I looked for patterns that did not belong in nature. There, about 50 feet up on a Douglas fir partially obscured by a thick branch, was a knot in the wood that looked too dark. I adjusted the focus. It was not a knot. It was a lens. A high-definition long-range surveillance camera, housed in a casing, texturized to look exactly like tree bark. It was pointing directly at the entrance to the trail. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not a remnant of an old mine. This was active surveillance. If I drove past that sign, someone would know. I put the truck in reverse and backed up slowly for about 200 yards until I found a dense thicket of rhododendrons. I drove the Bronco straight into the brush, ignoring the screech of branches against the paint. I pulled the waterproof tarp over the white roof to break up the outline. "Stay here, girl," I whispered to the truck. I grabbed my duffel bag and the tool roll. I checked the revolver one last time, then tucked it into the holster inside my jacket. I began to walk. The hike was brutal. The air was cold, dropping rapidly toward freezing as the night came on. My knees, worn down by years of kneeling on concrete floors in front of safes, protested with every step. But I pushed the pain down. Pain was just a signal it could be ignored. I moved parallel to the road, staying deep in the tree line to avoid the camera's field of view. I moved slowly, placing my feet carefully to avoid snapping dry branches. Heel to toe, roll the weight. Silence. After 45 minutes of climbing, the trees opened up into a small clearing nestled against a sheer cliff face. And there it was. The cabin looked like a ruin. The roof sagged. The wood was gray and weathered, looking like it had been rotting there since the gold rush of the 1800s. There was a pile of rusted mining equipment out front, a broken ore cart, some twisted rails. It was the perfect picture of abandonment. But I was standing 20 yards away and I saw the deception immediately. The chimney was smoking. Not much, just a thin wisp of blue wood smoke that dissipated quickly in the wind. Someone was home. I crept closer, moving from trunk to trunk, my hand gripping the butt of the revolver. I reached the edge of the porch. The floorboards looked rotten, but when I tested one with my weight, it did not creak. It felt solid, reinforced from below. I moved to the door. It was made of rough-hewn planks, stained dark with age. It had a simple iron handle that looked like it would snap off if you pulled too hard. I pulled out my flashlight and held it close to the wood shielding the beam with my hand. I looked at the gap between the door and the frame. There was a glint of steel. This was not wood. It was a ballistic steel core door clad in a veneer of distressed timber. It was a fortress gate disguised as a shack door. I looked at the keyhole. It was not a standard pin tumbler lock. It was a circular indentation barely visible in the grain of the wood. I recognized the geometry. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I knew this lock. I had designed the prototype for this lock 15 years ago for a private vault in Zurich. It was a quad-layer arithmetic mechanical lock. It did not use springs or pins. It used a series of rotating discs that had to be aligned based on a mathematical algorithm. It was unpickable by conventional means. You needed the code, or you needed to be the person who built it. My son had installed my masterpiece on a rotting cabin in the middle of nowhere. I holstered the flashlight. I stood there on the porch, the wind howling softly around the eaves. I was alone in the wilderness, miles from civilization, staring at a door that cost more than my house. Who was inside? Was it Liam? Or had Sarah and Marcus found him first? Was this a sanctuary, or was it a tomb? I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. I reached out and placed my hand flat against the cold fake wood of the door. I could feel the vibration of the mechanism inside, silent and waiting. I did not knock. You do not knock on a vault. You announce your presence to the steel. I tapped the metal faceplate with my wedding ring. Clink, 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 clink. 2 shorts. 1 long, 1 short. It was the code we used to tap on the garage pipes when dinner was ready. It was the Morse code for the letter F, for family. I waited. The silence stretched out. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute. Then from inside the cabin I heard a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the heavy, oiled thunk-clack hiss of 4 hardened steel deadbolts retracting simultaneously. The door groaned inward just an inch. I stepped back, my hand flying to my weapon, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Darkness spilled out from the crack in the door. "Identify!" a voice rasped from the shadows. It was hoarse, unrecognizable. "It is the courier," I said, my voice steady, despite the fear gripping my throat. "I have the delivery." The door opened wider. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the dim light of a dying fire. Joseph. The name hung in the air, fragile as smoke. I stared into the darkness, trying to find the face of my son, but the figure stepped back, raising something that looked dangerously like a weapon. "Come in," the voice commanded, "before they see you." I stepped across the threshold, into the belly of the beast, and the heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, sealing us in. I stood on that freezing porch, the wind biting through my flannel jacket, staring at the steel core of the door that was masquerading as rotting timber. My hand was still raised in the air, trembling slightly from the cold and the adrenaline. I had tapped out the rhythm. 2 shorts, 1 long, 1 short. It was the heartbeat of our family, a secret language, tapped on garage workbenches and kitchen tables for 30 years. But the door did not open immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of nature, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. I checked my watch. 1 minute passed. The only sound was the wind hissing through the pine needles above me. I shifted my weight, the floorboards under my boots feeling solid despite their decayed appearance. 2 minutes. Doubt began to creep into my mind like a slow-acting poison. Had I been wrong? Was this just the hallucination of a grieving old man? Maybe Liam was dead. Maybe I was standing in front of a drug runner's hideout or a doomsday prepper's bunker, and any second now a bullet would tear through the wood and end my foolish quest. I gripped the handle of the revolver inside my jacket, my palm sweating against the grip. 3 minutes. 180 seconds of agonizing stillness. I let out a breath that fogged in the night air. I had been wrong. The GPS, the voice recording the hidden message, it was all just a desperate mind trying to make sense of a tragedy. I lowered my head, defeated. I turned away from the door, ready to face the long, dark hike back to the truck. And then I heard it. It was the heavy, distinctive sound of industrial steel moving against steel. The groan of heavy-duty deadbolts retracting. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound was loud, mechanical, and beautiful. I spun around. The heavy door swung inward, not with a creak, but with a smooth, silent glide of well-oiled ball-bearing hinges. I did not see a face at first. I saw a weapon. A crossbow, matte black and wicked-looking, was leveled directly at my chest. The tip of the bolt was razor-sharp, glinting in the low light, coming from the fireplace inside. My survival instinct screamed at me to draw my gun, but my body froze. Holding the weapon was a man I barely recognized. He was gaunt, his cheekbones jutting out sharply beneath skin that looked gray and lack of sunlight. He had a thick, unkempt beard that hid the lower half of his face, and his hair was long, matted and tied back with a piece of dirty twine. He wore layers of mismatched tactical gear and stained wool. He looked like a mountain man, a hermit who had been living off bark and rabbit meat for a decade. He looked wild, dangerous. But then I looked at his eyes. They were deep brown, framed by exhaustion, burning with a mix of terrifying intensity and fear. They were the eyes of the boy who used to ask me why the sky was blue. They were the eyes of the young man who cried when he got his acceptance letter to MIT. "Dad." The word cracked in the air, brittle and weak. It was not the voice of a stranger. It was the voice of my son. The crossbow wavered. The deadly aim dipped toward the floor. "Liam!" I whispered the name, catching in my throat like a jagged stone. Is that you?" He lowered the weapon completely, his hands shaking so hard the bolt rattled against the frame. "Dad, you came." I did not speak. I could not. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I surged forward, crossing the threshold in 2 strides. I did not care about the weapon. I did not care about the danger. I grabbed him by the shoulders of his dirty jacket. He was real. He was not a ghost. He was solid. I could feel the thinness of his arms through the layers of clothes, the bony ridge of his shoulders. He smelled of wood smoke, unwashed sweat, and gun oil. It was the most beautiful smell I had ever encountered. "You are alive," I choked out, pulling him into a crushing embrace. "My God, you are alive!" Liam collapsed against me, the crossbow clattering to the floor. He sobbed a raw, guttural sound that seemed to tear itself out of his chest. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry." I held him for a long time, patting his back with my gloved hand, tears streaming down my own face and freezing in my beard. I needed this. I needed to feel the heat of his body to rewrite the memory of that cold mahogany casket. Suddenly, Liam stiffened. The survivalist took over the son. He pulled away from me, his eyes darting to the darkness outside the door. "Get inside," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "Now." He pulled me deeper into the cabin and slammed the heavy door shut. He threw the locking mechanism, spinning the wheel that engaged the four-way bolts. He then engaged a secondary electronic lock, typing a code into a keypad I had not even noticed on the doorframe. "Secure," he muttered. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and then I looked around the room. The outside of the cabin was a lie. The inside was a fortress. The walls were reinforced with steel plating. But what took my breath away was the equipment. One entire wall of the cabin was dominated by a bank of computer servers, their cooling fans humming with a low, constant drone. 6 high-definition monitors were mounted above a desk cluttered with hard drives, blueprints, and half-eaten cans of beans. On the screens I saw feeds from thermal cameras hidden in the forest. I saw satellite imagery. I saw scrolling lines of code that moved faster than I could read. This was not a hideout. This was a command center. It looked like something out of a spy movie or the control room at NASA jammed into a log cabin in the wilderness of Montana. Liam walked over to the desk and slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I did not think you would figure out the code so fast," he said, his voice muffled. "I thought I had another week." I walked over to him. My shock was fading, replaced by a surge of confusion and a sharp, stinging anger. "Liam," I said, my voice stern. "Look at me." He looked up. He looked so young and so old at the same time. "We buried you," I said. "I stood there, Liam. I stood there in the rain and watched them lower you into the ground. I held a handful of dirt and threw it on your coffin." Mrs. Henderson cried. Pete from the gas station cried. I died inside that day." Liam flinched, as if I had hit him. "I know, Dad. I watched the funeral. I hacked the security cameras at the cemetery. I saw you." "You watched?" I stared at him, incredulous. "You watched me grieve." "Who was in that box, Liam? If you are here, who the hell did I bury?" Liam took a deep breath. He reached for a bottle of water on the desk and took a shaky sip. "His name was John. He was a homeless man I knew from downtown. He died of an overdose in an alley behind my office building the night before the crash. No family. No ID. The city would have just cremated him as a John Doe." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You put a stranger in your car." "I had to," Liam said, his voice hardening. "I needed a body, Dad. I moved him into the driver's seat. I staged the crash. The fire had to be hot enough to make visual identification impossible. I swapped his dental records in the coroner's database 5 minutes before the autopsy began. It was the only way." "The only way!" I shouted. The anger boiled over. I reached out and slapped him across the cheek. It was not a heavy blow, just a sharp, stinging tap to snap him out of his detachment, to remind him that I was his father, and he was my child. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? The pain, the hopelessness." "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me one word, Liam? Just one word to let me know you weren't gone." Liam took the slap without blinking. He looked at me, his eyes filling with fresh tears. He reached out and took my hand, the one that had just struck him, and held it tightly. "Because if I had told you," he whispered, "you would be dead right now." I froze. "What?" "They were listening, Dad," Liam said, his voice trembling with intensity. "Sarah and Marcus. They did not just go after me. They went after you too. 6 months ago, I found a transmission spike coming from your house. My house? I pulled my hand away, feeling suddenly exposed. Your kitchen, Liam said. There is a listening device inside the smoke detector. Your bedroom. There is a bug inside the base of your bedside lamp. Your garage. There is a camera hidden in the motion sensor light. They have been watching you, listening to every breath you take, waiting for me to make contact. I sank into a chair opposite him, my legs suddenly feeling like water. 6 months. If I had called you, Liam continued, leaning forward. If I had sent a text, a letter, anything, Marcus would have known within seconds, and they would have killed you to get to me. They would have tortured you to find out where I was. I had to let you grieve, Dad. I had to let them see you broken. It was the only way to keep you safe. He looked at the screens, at the scrolling data. I sat here for 3 weeks, he said softly, watching you cry in that empty house, watching you sleep in your chair with the TV on because you were too lonely to go to bed. It killed me, Dad. Every second of it killed me. But I had to protect you. I looked at my son. I saw the torture in his face. He had not abandoned me. He had taken on the burden of being dead to save my life. He had watched his father mourn him, unable to reach out, trapped in this cabin with his ghosts and his machines. They want the source code, I said, remembering the message in the truck. They want everything, Liam corrected. Nexus Logic is just the beginning. Marcus is brokering a deal to sell the entire back-end infrastructure of the national banking security system to a syndicate in Eastern Europe. If that sale goes through, they can drain accounts, erase debts, crash economies. It is worth billions. And you are the only one who can stop it, I said. No, Liam shook his head. He pointed at me. We are the only ones. I have the data, but I am legally dead. I cannot walk into the FBI headquarters. I cannot file a motion in court. I am a ghost. But you are Joseph Brown. You are the grieving father. You are invisible. He stood up and walked to a metal cabinet. He pulled out a map, a blueprint of a building I recognized immediately. It was the Nexus Logic headquarters. I need you to be my hands, Dad, Liam said. I can hack the doors. I can loop the cameras. I can kill the alarms. But I need someone inside. Someone who knows how to pick a lock that cannot be hacked. Someone who knows how to move through a secure facility without triggering the pressure sensors. He looked at me with a desperate hope. I need the vault technician, he said. I looked at the blueprint. I looked at the complex locking mechanisms detailed in the margins. I felt a familiar itch in my fingers. The grief was gone now, completely replaced by a cold, hard determination. They bugged my house, I said quietly. They watched me sleep. They laughed at me at the funeral. Yes, Liam said. And they tried to kill you. Yes, I stood up. I adjusted my flannel jacket. I checked the load in my revolver. Okay, son, I said. Show me the lock. Let's see if your old man still remembers how to crack a safe. Liam smiled, and for the first time it looked like a real smile. Welcome to the team, Dad. We spent the rest of the night, not as father and son, but as partners. We were two engineers looking at a problem. The problem was a fortress of lies and greed, and we were about to bring the whole thing crashing down. The emotional heat of our reunion faded, quickly replaced by the frigid blue light of the monitors that lined the cabin wall. Liam sat in the swivel chair, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard that clattered like hail on a tin roof. I stood behind him, my hand resting on the back of the chair, watching the stream of data scrolling down the screen. To an untrained eye, it was just gibberish hexadecimal codes, IP addresses, and encrypted communication logs. But to a man who had spent 40 years securing assets, I recognized the pattern of a breach. Look at this, Dad, Liam said, his voice flat and clinical. He pointed to a highlighted section of code. This isn't just a corporate ledger. This is the source code for the Sentinel protocol. I leaned in, squinting through my reading glasses. The Sentinel protocol. That is the contract you won with the Department of Defense last year. The encryption system for the national power grid. Exactly, Liam said. It is the digital lock on the front door of America's infrastructure. And Sarah and Marcus aren't just trying to copy the key. They are selling the master mold. He tapped a few keys, and a new window popped up. It showed a series of wire transfers, routed through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and finally landing in a bank in a country that I knew the United States did not have friendly relations with. $500 million, Liam whispered. That is the asking price. They negotiated a $500 million payout to hand over the backdoor access to a foreign criminal syndicate. If this deal goes through, those buyers could shut down hospitals in New York, turn off the traffic lights in Los Angeles, or drain the Federal Reserve. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I knew they were greedy, I said. I saw it in Sarah's eyes when she looked at the house. But treason, espionage. It gets worse, Liam said. I found this transaction log 3 months ago. I was going to go to the FBI. I had to contact a field agent I had worked with on a previous security audit. I arranged a meeting, but 2 hours before I was supposed to hand over the evidence, I got a notification from the internal banking alerts I had set up on Marcus's accounts. Liam pulled up another document. It was a bank statement. Marcus wired $200,000 to an offshore account linked to that FBI agent's wife, Liam said. They bought him, Dad. They own him. If I had walked into that meeting, I would never have walked out. I would have disappeared into a federal holding cell or worse. I looked at my son, seeing the weight of the isolation he had been carrying. He had been trapping a rat, only to realize the rat owned the exterminator. So you ran, I said. I tried, Liam corrected. But they were watching me closer than I thought. That camping trip to Sleeping Bear Dunes. It wasn't a spontaneous vacation. I was planning to drive North Cross into Canada and leak the information to the press from a secure server in Toronto. But they got to the car first. He minimized the financial records and opened a folder labeled Crash_Analysis. A 3D schematic of his Tesla appeared on the screen. It zoomed in on the braking system. I always inspect my vehicle before a long trip, Liam said. Force of habit. You taught me that. Kick the tires, check the oil. But this time I checked the hydraulics. At first glance, everything looked fine. The lines were intact. There was no fluid leaking. But then I used a UV scanner. He pointed to a microscopic image on the screen. The braided steel line of the brake hose looked normal, but under the enhancement, I could see a faint hairline discoloration. Thermal laser, I said, recognizing the signature immediately. We used to see this in high-end vault burglaries in the 90s. They use a concentrated heat beam to weaken the molecular structure of the metal without cutting it. It holds pressure under normal driving conditions, but the moment you slam on the brakes, like on a steep mountain curve, the pressure spikes and the metal disintegrates. Exactly, Liam nodded. No cut marks, no tool marks. The forensic team would call it a catastrophic material failure, an accident, a tragedy. So you knew the brakes would fail, I said, piecing it together. I knew, Liam said. And I knew that if I didn't get in that car and drive away, they would know I was onto them. So I installed a secondary manual braking system, a mechanical override that bypassed the hydraulics entirely. I drove to the cliff. I set the cruise control. I jumped out at the last second and I let the car go over. He looked down at his hands. I watched it burn, Dad. I watched my life go up in flames. And then I started walking. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the computer fans. The magnitude of the violence was staggering. They had used military-grade technology to murder my son, all for a payout that they hadn't even received yet. But the evidence, I said, looking back at the screens. You said you have the evidence. Is it on these servers? No, Liam said. These servers are just for monitoring and decryption. The data here is mirrored, but it's incomplete. If they find this cabin, they find nothing but ghost data. The original source code, the recording of Marcus negotiating the deal, the wire transfer receipts, the cryptographic proof that sends them to prison for life, is on a physical drive. He turned in his chair and looked at me with a strange intensity. "Where is it?" I asked. "I couldn't carry it with me," Liam said. "Too risky. If I was caught, they would destroy it. I needed to put it somewhere that Sarah would never look. Somewhere she despised. Somewhere she thought was worthless." He paused, letting the realization hit me. I thought about the lawyer's office. I thought about the keys sliding across the mahogany table. I thought about Sarah's smirk as she called the truck a useless piece of junk. "The Bronco," I whispered. Liam nodded slowly. "The hard drive is inside the frame rail welded into a false section of the chassis on the passenger side. It is shielded with lead to block scanning, and it is heat insulated." I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees felt weak, and I had to lean against the heavy wooden desk for support. "I drove it here," I said, my voice barely audible. "I drove 20 hours. I stopped at gas stations. I slept in parking lots. I was driving a $500 million bomb." "It was the safest place in the world," Liam said. "Sarah hates that truck. To her, it represents everything she hates about us grease dirt, old things, manual labor. She was so happy to get rid of it, she practically paid you to take it. She would never imagine that the fortune she killed for was sitting in her driveway rusting." "You used her arrogance against her," I said. It was brilliant. It was the kind of psychological engineering that I had never taught him, but he had mastered on his own. "But there is something else," Liam said. His expression darkened. The clinical detachment vanished, replaced by a simmering rage that matched my own. "I didn't just record the business deals, Dad. When I bugged the house, I caught other things." He reached for the mouse. "I wasn't going to play this for you. I thought it might be too much. But now that you are here, now that we are going to war, you need to know exactly who we are fighting." He clicked on an audio file labeled Sarah, _phone, _intercept, _OCT, _14. The speakers crackled, and then Sarah's voice filled the room. It was crystal clear, recorded from the high-fidelity microphone in her smartphone. "I am telling you, Marcus, it is done," Sarah's voice said. She sounded bored, perhaps sipping wine. "The old man took the truck. He looked like a beaten dog. It was pathetic." Then Marcus's voice. "Are you sure he won't cause trouble? He was an engineer, Sarah. He's not stupid." "He is a dinosaur," Sarah laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound that grated on my nerves. "He is 72 years old. He lives in the past. He thinks fixing a toaster makes him useful. Once the insurance money clears and the Sentinel deal is done, I am going to handle him." "Handle him how?" Marcus asked. "There is a facility downstate," Sarah said. "Shady Acres or something like that. It is state-funded, barely meets code. It smells like urine and boiled cabbage. It is cheap. I will put him there. I will sign the power of attorney papers claiming he is incompetent due to grief. I will dump him in a room with no window and let him rot." There was a pause in the recording then. She added, "He is just a loose end, Marcus. A useless eater. The sooner he dies, the sooner I can stop pretending to care about his rusty old anecdotes." Liam clicked the stop button. The silence that returned to the cabin was heavy, charged with a violence that felt almost electrical. I stood there staring at the black screen. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I felt a strange, cold sensation spreading through my chest, freezing the blood in my veins. It was the feeling of total clarity. For weeks I had mourned her loss too. I had comforted her. I had held her hand at the funeral. I had thought of her as the daughter I never had. And all the while she was planning to discard me like trash. She did not just want my son's money. She wanted to erase my existence. She wanted to strip me of my dignity, my freedom, and my life just to save a few dollars on a nursing home bill. "Dad?" Liam asked softly. He was watching me carefully, perhaps, afraid I would have a heart attack. I turned to look at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of Sarah, but fear for me. He thought this would break me. He was wrong. I walked over to the wall where I had leaned my duffel bag. I unzipped it, slowly. My hands were steady. I took out my tool roll and laid it on the desk next to the computer. The steel picks gleamed in the blue light. "She thinks I am a dinosaur," I said quietly. My voice sounded different to my own ears, deeper, harder, devoid of any tremor. "She thinks I am a useless old man who fixes toasters." I looked at Liam. "Do you know what happens when you underestimate the structural integrity of a foundation, son?" Liam shook his head slowly. "The whole building collapses," I said. I picked up a tension wrench, testing its weight. "We are not running anymore, Liam. We are not hiding in the woods waiting for the FBI to save us. We are not waiting for justice to fall from the sky." I slammed the wrench down on the desk. The sound rang out like a gunshot. "She wants to talk about useless old things. Fine. We are going to show her exactly what this useless old man can do. We are going to take that truck back. We are going to invite them in. And then we are going to lock the door." I looked at the blueprint of the Nexus Logic building, and then I looked at the map of my own house on the screen, the house they had bugged, the house they planned to sell after they threw me in a cage. "To destroy a building," I said, looking my son in the eye, "you don't start at the roof. You start at the foundation. We are going to break them, Liam. We are going to strip them of their money, their freedom, and their arrogance. And we are going to do it using the very tools they despised." Liam looked at me, and I saw a spark ignite in his eyes. The fear was gone. He nodded a slow, grim movement. "Self-preservation," Liam said. "No," I corrected him. "This isn't just preservation anymore. This is demolition." The cabin in the Montana wilderness transformed from a shelter into a war room. We called it Project Ironclad, a nod to the company, where I had cut my teeth, and learned that the best defense is a proactive offense. For the next 12 hours, Liam and I worked in a rhythm that only two engineers from the same bloodline could achieve. It was a symphony of analog and digital, old school and new school merging into a single weapon. Liam took the digital front. He sat hunched over his keyboard, his face illuminated by the cascade of code on the screens. "I am creating a ghost trail," he explained, his fingers never stopping. "I am hacking into the local traffic cameras near your house. I am going to loop footage from 3 weeks ago to make it look like your truck has been in the driveway the whole time. If Marcus checks the feeds, he will see you never left." "Good," I said, looking up from the workbench. "Blind them first." My task was physical. I had the Bronco pulled up to the side of the cabin where we had rigged a makeshift lift. I crawled underneath, locating the false section of the chassis rail Liam had described. With a grinder, I carefully cut the welds. Sparks showered down around me, but I didn't flinch. I was in my element. When the metal plate fell away there, it was a solid-state hard drive wrapped in heat-resistant Nomex and encased in a lead box. It was small, heavy and cold. $500 million of treason in a box the size of a cigarette pack. "I need to shield this better," I said, sliding out from under the truck. "If Marcus gets close with a frequency scanner, and he will, if he is as paranoid as we think, he might pick up the magnetic signature of the drive's controller." I went to the scrap pile outside the cabin. I found some old lead flashing from the roof and a heavy iron pipe. I brought them inside. Using a propane torch and a crucible I fashioned from a cast iron pot, I melted the lead. I poured a thick new casing around the drive's existing box, sealing it completely. Then, I welded the iron pipe around that. It was ugly, heavy, and impenetrable to scanners. "What is the play, Dad?" Liam asked, spinning his chair around. "We have the evidence. We have the element of surprise. How do we draw them out? I wiped the grease from my hands with a rag. We use their greed against them. Greed makes people predictable. It makes them sloppy. I walked over to the map of Chicago on the wall. They think the truck is junk, I said. But they are also terrified that you left something behind. Sarah gave me the truck because she wanted it out of her sight, but deep down, she is wondering why you kept it. If I just keep it, she is happy. I am just a senile old man with a hobby. But what if I try to sell it? Liam's eyes widened. If you sell it to a stranger, the truck leaves their sphere of control. If a collector strips it down and finds something. Exactly, I said. Panic. We need to induce panic. The plan was simple but brutal. I would return to Chicago. I would announce that I was selling the Bronco to a private collector, a fictional buyer Liam would create a digital footprint for. A wealthy, eccentric collector who tears cars down to the frame. This would force Sarah and Marcus to act. They would have to stop the sale. They would have to get the truck back to ensure their secrets remained buried. I will be the bait, I said. And the trap will be my garage. It is dangerous, Liam said quietly. If they come for you, they won't come to talk. They will come to take. I am counting on it, I said. Self-preservation isn't just about building walls, son. It is about controlling the battlefield. You don't wait for the intruder to break your window. You lead him to the door you have already rigged to collapse. To add another layer of psychological pressure, we decided to haunt Sarah. Not with sheets and chains, but with technology. Can you access her smart home system? I asked. I built it, Liam smirked. I have root access to everything. The lights, the thermostat, the sound system. Good, I said. Start messing with her. Make the lights flicker at the exact time you died. Make the thermostat drop 10 degrees in the middle of the night. Play that song, the one you danced to at your wedding. But play it so quietly she thinks she is imagining it. Gaslighting, Liam nodded. Drive her crazy. Make her think the guilt is manifesting. Make her terrified, I corrected. Fear makes people seek comfort. She will run to Marcus. They will make mistakes. They will talk on open lines. While Liam coded the haunting scripts, I worked on the physical countermeasures. I needed to turn my garage into a catch pen. I needed jammers to block their cell signals once they were inside, so they couldn't call for backup. We don't have military jammers, Liam pointed out. We don't need them, I said. I grabbed an old microwave oven from the cabin's kitchen. I can build a localized wideband disruptor, using the magnetron from this microwave and a directional antenna. It won't be pretty, and it will only work for about 50 feet, but it will kill any cellular or Wi-Fi signal in my driveway. I spent the next hour gutting the microwave, wiring the high-voltage capacitor to a copper coil I wound myself. It was dangerous work, one slip, and the voltage could stop my heart, but my hands were steady. I mounted the device in an old toolbox so it looked innocuous. Put this on the shelf in the garage, I told myself. Plug it into the switched outlet. One flip of the switch and they are deaf and blind. By dawn, we were ready. The truck was reassembled, the drive hidden deeper than before, shielded by my custom lid casing. The plan was locked in. I stood on the porch of the cabin, the morning sun hitting the peaks of the mountains. It was time to go. Liam stood in the doorway. He looked different now. The desperate, hunted look was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. He looked like the CEO he was meant to be, even in his dirty clothes. You have to stay here, I said. Keep the digital pressure on. Monitor the feeds. When I give the signal, when I trap them, you call the police. You send the evidence to the FBI, the press, everyone. But not a second before. I won't let you down, Dad, Liam said. I know, I said. I reached out and hugged him. It was brief, hard and fierce. We are fixing this, son. We are fixing everything. Be careful, he whispered. Careful is for amateurs. I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I am going to be professional. I climbed into the Bronco. The engine roared to life, breaking the morning silence. I didn't look back as I drove down the mountain track. There was no room for sentimentality now. I was leaving my son behind to go into a cage with lions, but this time I was bringing a whip. The drive back was a transformation. Mile by mile, Joseph the grieving father faded away. Joseph the victim evaporated. In his place sat Joseph Brown, the vault technician. I rehearsed my lines. I practiced the tremor in my voice. I visualized the layout of my garage, calculating angles, lines of sight, and choke points. When I was about an hour outside of Chicago, I pulled into a rest stop. I found a payphone, a relic rare these days, but I knew where to look. I didn't want to use a cell phone that could be triangulated. I dialed Sarah's number. It rang 3 times. "Hello." Her voice was sharp, stressed. Liam's haunting must have already started. "Sarah," I said, letting my voice crack and wobble. "It is Dad." "Dad, where have you been? We have been trying to call you for 2 days. You disappeared." "I am sorry, dear," I stammered. I just needed to drive, to think. But I am coming home now. I am just passing through Rockford." "Well, thank God," she sighed, the fake relief washing over the line. "Just come home, Dad. We were so worried." "I made a decision, Sarah," I said, pitching my voice to sound guilty but resolute. "You were right. The truck. It is too much for me. Too many memories. It hurts to look at it." "Oh!" Her tone shifted instantly. She became alert. "So, what are you going to do with it? We can have the junkyard pick it up." No, I said quickly. "I found a buyer, a collector in St. Louis. He loves these old Fords. He offered me enough money to pay for that nursing home you talked about. He is coming to pick it up tomorrow morning. He wants to strip it down for parts." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear her heart stop. "Strip it down." That was the trigger phrase. "Tomorrow," she asked, her voice rising an octave. That is very sudden, Dad. Are you sure? Maybe we should look at it first. Liam might have left personal things in there." "I checked," I lied. "It is empty. Just junk. I need the money, Sarah. I don't want to be a burden to you anymore. I will be home in an hour. The buyer comes at 8 a.m. tomorrow." "Wait, Dad, don't—" I hung up. I stood there in the cold wind of the rest stop, watching the traffic rush by on the interstate. I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. The hook was set. She would call Marcus immediately. They would panic. They couldn't let a stranger take that truck apart. They couldn't risk the drive being found. They had to act tonight. I walked back to the Bronco. I patted the hood. "Ready for the final act, girl," I whispered. I got in and merged back onto the highway. The city skyline loomed in the distance, gray and jagged. To most people, it looked like home. To me, it looked like a hunting ground. And for the first time in a long time, I was not the prey. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 4 in the afternoon. The late October sun was already beginning to fade, casting long, mournful shadows across the neighborhood. I parked the Bronco, not in the garage, but right in the driveway, visible to the street, a white, rusting monument for all to see. I climbed out slowly, exaggerating the stiffness in my knees for the benefit of anyone watching. And they were watching. Mrs. Henderson was peering through her blinds. A man walking his dog paused to look. I let them see a tired old man dragging his duffel bag shoulders, slumped under the weight of grief. But inside, my heart was beating with the steady, powerful rhythm of a diesel engine. I entered my house. It smelled stale, like unused rooms and dust. I walked straight to the kitchen, dropped my bag, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes later, a sleek, black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. It was Marcus's car. Sarah was in the passenger seat. They moved quickly up the walk, their urgency barely concealed beneath a veneer of concern. I opened the door before they could knock. "Dad!" Sarah exclaimed, rushing forward to hug me. It was like embracing a statue of ice. "You had us scared to death. Where did you go?" Just driving, Sarah," I said, patting her back awkwardly. I needed to clear my head, to say goodbye properly. Marcus stood behind her, his eyes scanning the hallway, then darting past me toward the back of the house where the garage was. "We were worried, Joseph. A man your age driving that death trap across state lines. It is irresponsible." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. I made tea. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had bounced Liam on my knee, the same room where Margaret and I had watched TV for 30 years. Now it felt like a courtroom. Sarah sat on the edge of the sofa, her knuckles white, as she clutched her purse. Marcus stood by the fireplace, too restless to sit. "So," Marcus said, trying to sound casual, "you mentioned on the phone you found a buyer for the truck." I took a slow sip of my tea. I let the silence stretch, watching their reactions. "Yes, a nice fellow from St. Louis. He called me a few days ago, saw the ad I put in the paper before I left. He restores these old Fords, does frame-off restorations, takes them apart down to the last bolt." I saw Sarah flinch. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a garish mask. "Takes them apart," she repeated, her voice thin. "Oh yes," I said, smiling benignly. "He says you never know what you find in these old chassis. Rust rot. Secrets of the road." Marcus turned from the fireplace. His face was composed, but I saw the muscle in his jaw twitching. "Joseph, I really don't think you should sell it. It was Liam's. It is a family heirloom." "An heirloom," I chuckled softly. "Last week you called it a piece of junk, Marcus. You said it was a fitting gift for a useless old fool." "I never said that," Marcus protested, though his eyes betrayed him. "Maybe not in those words," I said, looking down at my teacup. "But I felt it, and you are right. I am old, and this house, it is too big. The heating bills, the taxes, I need the money." I looked directly at Sarah. "I am just doing what you suggested, Sarah. I am preparing for the future. That nursing home. Shady Acres. I looked it up. It is not cheap, but the money from this truck will cover the first year. After that, well, maybe I will just fade away like you want." The hook went deep. Sarah looked away, unable to meet my gaze. She knew I was quoting her, or at least parroting her intentions, but she couldn't admit it without revealing she had been caught. The cognitive dissonance was tearing her apart. "Dad, please," she whispered. "We can help you. You don't have to sell the truck." "I have already taken the deposit," I lied. $5,000. He wired it this morning. He is coming with a trailer at 8 tomorrow. It is a done deal." Marcus stepped forward. The pretense of politeness was slipping. "How much is he paying you?" 10,020. 15, I said. "I will give you 50, Marcus said instantly. I raised an eyebrow. $50,000 for a rusted 1996 Bronco. Marcus, are you feeling all right?" "It is sentimental value," Marcus said quickly. Too quickly. "Liam loved that truck. I can't let it go to a stranger. I will write you a check right now. 50,000. We can tear up the other guy's contract. I will handle the legal fees." He reached into his jacket pocket for his checkbook. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from grief, but from the adrenaline of a man trying to cover a murder. "That is very generous," I said slowly. "But I can't." "Why not?" Marcus snapped. "Because I gave the man my word," I said. "And in my generation, a man's word is worth more than money. You might not understand that, Marcus, being a lawyer and all." Marcus froze. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. For a second, I thought he might strike me right there in my living room. I saw his right hand clench into a fist. I saw him calculate the distance between us. I tensed my legs, ready to move, ready to fight. But then Sarah stood up. She put a hand on Marcus's arm. "It is okay," she said, her voice trembling. "If Dad promised, he promised. We should respect that." She looked at me, and her eyes were pleading, desperate. Can we have one last look at it before it goes? Maybe there is something of Liam's inside we missed." "It is locked in the garage now," I said. "And I lost the keys somewhere in the house. I am so forgetful these days. But don't worry. The buyer has a master key. He will open it up tomorrow." "You lost the keys?" Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Old age." I tapped my temple. "Terrible thing. Anyway, I am exhausted. That drive really took it out of me. I think I need to sleep." I stood up, dismissing them. It was a power move. I was kicking them out of my house, turning my back on their money, and denying them access to the one thing they needed to stay out of prison. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. "Sleep well, Joseph," he said. The threat hung in the air like smoke. "Enjoy your rest." "I will," I said. "I always sleep better when my conscience is clear." I walked them to the door. As they walked down the path to the Mercedes, I saw them arguing. Sarah was gesturing wildly. Marcus was gripping the steering wheel before he even got in. They were panicked. They were desperate. And desperate people do stupid things. I locked the front door. I locked the deadbolt. Then I went to the back door and locked that too. I went around the house, closing every blind, checking every window latch. But I did not go to bed. I went to the garage. I moved the Bronco into the center of the bay. I plugged in the microwave jammer I had built with Liam, setting it on the workbench near the door. I checked the camera I had hidden in the rafters, a simple baby monitor I had modified to transmit to a handheld screen. Then, I went to the living room and turned off all the lights. I sat in my armchair in the corner, shrouded in darkness. I had the Smith & Wesson in my lap. I had a thermos of black coffee on the side table. I waited. The hours ticked by. 10 o'clock, midnight, 1 in the morning. The house settled, groaning and creaking as old houses do. Every sound made my ears prick up. The wind against the siding, the refrigerator compressor humming. But I filtered those out. I was listening for the unnatural sounds. The scuff of a boot on concrete, the click of a lockpick. At 1:55 a.m., I saw it. On the small screen of the baby monitor, a shadow moved across the driveway. It was not a raccoon or a stray cat. It was a human figure dressed in dark clothing. Then another. And a third. They were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to raid. I watched as they approached the side door of the garage. It was the weak point, or so they thought. I had left the lock intentionally old and wobbly a temptation. One of the figures knelt down. I saw the glint of a tool. He was picking the lock. "Come on in," I whispered into the darkness. "Welcome to the vault." I stood up silently. My joints didn't crack. My breathing was slow and controlled. I moved through the dark hallway toward the kitchen door that connected to the garage. I heard the garage door click open. A hinge squeaked softly. They were inside. I reached out and flipped the switch on the wall. Not the light switch, but the switch that controlled the outlet for the microwave jammer. A low hum vibrated through the wall. The jammer was active. Their phones were now bricks. Their connection to the outside world was severed. I opened the kitchen door and stepped onto the small landing that overlooked the garage floor. I was in the shadows, invisible. Below me, 3 beams of tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping over the white body of the Bronco. They moved toward the truck, like wolves circling a wounded animal. I saw Marcus. He wasn't wearing a suit now. He was wearing a black jacket and holding a crowbar. The other 2 were big men, hired muscle, carrying what looked like tool bags. "Find it," Marcus hissed. "Tear it apart. Check the frame rails first." Sarah said he mentioned the chassis. "What about the old man?" one of the thugs asked. "If he wakes up, Marcus said, his voice cold and flat. "Kill him. Make it look like a break-in gone wrong." I raised the revolver. I didn't aim at them. I aimed at the metal light fixture hanging above their heads. The trap was sprung. I stood on the raised landing, obscured by the shadows of the rafters, looking down into the garage like a judge from a high bench. Below me, the beams of their flashlights sliced through the dusty air, frantic and jerky. Marcus and his 2 hired thugs were swarming over the Bronco like termites. I watched as one of the men, a giant with a shaved head, took a serrated hunting knife and slashed the driver's seat. Foam and leather exploded outward. He ripped the upholstery apart, searching for a hidden compartment that didn't exist. The other man was under the dashboard, ripping out the plastic panels I had so carefully reassembled just yesterday. They were not technicians, they were butchers. "Check the floorboards," Marcus hissed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He was sweating, his face pale in the reflected light. "Liam said it was in the chassis. Cut the carpet." The sound of tearing fabric and metal, screeching against metal, filled the garage. It was painful to watch my son's legacy being desecrated by these animals. But I held my position. Patience is the weapon of the old. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. It was a simple garage door opener I had modified. But it didn't open the door. It controlled the magnetic locks I had installed on the side door, the one they had just picked to get in. I pressed the button. Clack. The sound was loud, sharp and final. It was the sound of a 1,200-pound electromagnetic lock engaging. The thugs froze. "What was that?" the man under the dashboard asked, scrambling out. "The wind," Marcus snapped, though he looked toward the door nervously. "Keep working. We don't have all night." They went back to their destruction. Marcus grabbed the crowbar and smashed the glove compartment open, sending plastic shards flying. He was losing control. The cool, calculated lawyer was gone, replaced by a desperate criminal facing a life sentence. Now, I pressed the second button on my remote. From the 4 corners of the garage, hidden speakers crackled to life. I had wired them into the PA system I used to listen to baseball games while I worked. But tonight, they weren't playing the Tigers game. "Looking for something, Marcus." The voice boomed through the garage, distorted slightly by the volume, but unmistakably Liam's. Marcus jumped back as if he had been electrocuted. He spun around, swinging the crowbar at the empty air. "Who's there?" "Is it your conscience?" the recording continued. "Oh, wait. You sold that years ago." "Liam," Marcus whispered. His eyes were wide, terrified. He looked at the truck, then at the ceiling. "No. That is impossible. You are dead. I saw you burn." "Did you check the pulse, Marcus?" the voice mocked. "Or were you too busy counting the money?" "Shut up," Marcus screamed. He pulled a pistol from his waistband, a sleek black 9mm, and fired blindly at the ceiling. Bang, bang. The gunshots were deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster dust rained down from the drywall. One of the speakers shattered with a spark. "It is a recording, you idiot," the bald thug shouted, ducking behind the truck. "Someone is playing games with us." "Show yourself," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. He was panting, aiming the gun wildly around the room. "I know you are here, Joseph. Come out and die like a man." It was time to bring the light. I reached to the wall beside me and threw the heavy industrial switch I had salvaged from an old factory. Click thum. 4 high-intensity halogen floodlights, mounted in the corners of the garage, flared to life simultaneously. They were aimed downward directly at the center of the room. The sudden transition from darkness to 10,000 lumens of blinding white light was physically painful. Marcus and his men cried out, shielding their eyes, stumbling back. They were exposed, pinned down by the light like insects on a display board. I stepped forward to the railing of the landing. I was 10 feet above them, protected by a steel balustrade and the angle of the light. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said, my voice calm, projecting clearly over their confusion. "You are trespassing on private property." Marcus squinted up at me, blinking tears from his eyes. He raised his gun, trying to find a target in the glare. "Joseph, turn off these lights." "I don't think so," I said. "I like to see what I am dealing with. And what I am seeing is a breaking and entering, armed assault and attempted murder." Marcus laughed a jagged, hysterical sound. "You think I care about trespassing charges? I am in too deep for that, old man. Give me the drive, I know it is here." Liam hid it in the truck. "The drive?" I asked innocently. "Oh, you mean the hard drive with the Sentinel source code? And the recordings of you selling out your country?" Marcus went still. "You know, I know everything, Marcus. I know about the brake lines. I know about the payoff to the FBI agent. I know about Sarah's plan to put me in a nursing home." "Then you know you are a dead man," Marcus snarled. He leveled the gun at me. "Give it to me, or I will put a bullet in your head right now." I didn't flinch. I stood tall, looking down the barrel of his gun. "You can shoot me, Marcus, but that won't get you the drive." "Where is it?" he screamed. I smiled. It was the smile of a poker player holding a royal flush. "It is gone," I said. "I mailed it this morning, overnight express, addressed to the Assistant Director of the FBI in Washington, D.C. It should be arriving on his desk. Oh, in about 4 hours." "Liar!" Marcus shouted. "You are bluffing. Am I?" I pulled my phone from my pocket, a burner phone I had bought, not the one they were jamming. I held it up. "And just so you know, this entire garage is wired with cameras. Everything you have done for the last 10 minutes, the break-in, the gunshots, the threats, is being live-streamed to a secure cloud server. And I just sent the link to the Chicago Police Department." It was a lie. The jammer was blocking all signals, including mine. The video wasn't going anywhere. But Marcus didn't know about the jammer. He only knew technology was his enemy. Panic took over. Marcus looked at the camera lens I pointed to in the corner. He looked at his thugs. "Smash it," he ordered. "Smash the cameras. Find the drive." "Boss, if the cops are coming, we gotta go," the bald thug yelled. He ran to the side door and slammed into it, but the magnetic lock held fast. He bounced off, bruising his shoulder. "The door, it is stuck." "Open the garage door," Marcus yelled at me, waving the gun. "Open it now." "I am afraid I can't do that," I said. "The mechanism seems to be jammed. Old equipment, you know." "I will kill you," Marcus roared. He fired a shot at me. The bullet pinged off the steel railing inches from my hand. I dropped to a crouch, drawing my own revolver. "Self-defense," I whispered. "Get the truck," Marcus yelled to his men. "Ram the door, drive through it." The bald thug jumped into the driver's seat of the Bronco. He turned the key. Nothing happened. He turned it again. Click, click. "It won't start," he screamed. "Of course it won't," I called out from my cover. "I removed the starter relay before I went to bed. I told you, Marcus. I am a mechanic. I disable things for a living." Marcus was hyperventilating now. He was trapped in a bright box with a dismantled truck and a ghost haunting him. He looked at the main garage door, the big aluminum one. "We go through it on foot," he yelled. "Break the windows, climb out." He ran toward the small window on the side wall. He raised the crowbar to smash the glass. But before he could swing, a low rumble shook the floor. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the sound of an engine. But not the Bronco's engine. From the dark corner of the garage where I kept my tarp-covered projects, the Land Rover Defender, the one I had spent 5 years restoring, roared to life. The headlights snapped on twin beams of yellow light, cutting through the white glare of the floodlights. Marcus froze, staring at the vehicle. There was no one in the driver's seat. "What the hell?" he whispered. The Land Rover revved its engine, a mechanical beast waking up. I had rigged it. Remote start, remote throttle. It was a crude drone, a 2-ton battering ram on wheels. "Joseph!" Marcus screamed. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning up the shop," I said. I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket. The Land Rover surged forward. It wasn't aimed at the door. It was aimed at Marcus. The roar of the Land Rover's engine in the enclosed concrete space was like the bellow of a waking dragon. Marcus barely had time to turn his head before the 2-ton beast surged forward. It did not move with the hesitation of a remote-controlled toy. It moved with the aggressive precision of a guided missile. The two hired thugs who had been busy tearing apart the dashboard of the Bronco looked up just in time to see the matte black grille of the Defender filling their vision. They scrambled backward, boots slipping on the oil-stained floor, but they were too slow. The Land Rover slammed into the workbench. They were standing next to pinning them firmly between the heavy steel bumper and the wall of tool chests. It was a controlled impact violent enough to crush the breath out of them and shatter their nerve, but calculated to avoid lethal force. The workbench buckled with a screech of tearing metal. The thugs screamed, dropping their tools. Their arms pinned their legs, useless. They were trapped in a vise of British steel. Marcus was the only one left standing free. He stood in the center of the garage, the white floodlights washing him out like an overexposed photograph. He was trembling, his 9mm pistol hanging loosely in his hand, his eyes darting between the pinned men and the smoking grille of the Land Rover. "What is this?" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail of terror. "Who is driving that car?" The driver's side door of the Defender swung open. Time seemed to suspend itself in that garage. The dust motes dancing in the halogen beams slowed to a halt. I gripped the railing of the landing, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching the moment I had prayed for. A boot hit the concrete floor, then a leg. Then the figure emerged from the cab. It was not a ghost. It was something far more terrifying to a man like Marcus. It was the victim he thought he had buried. Liam stood there bathed in the harsh light. He was wearing the same dirty tactical gear from the cabin. His beard was wild, his hair matted, and his face was gaunt, but his eyes were burning with a cold, righteous fire. In his right hand, he held a high-voltage taser, the prongs sparking menacingly. Marcus took a step back. The gun slipped from his sweat-slicked fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor. He didn't even notice it fall. He stared at Liam with his mouth hanging open, his brain unable to process the data his eyes were feeding it. "No," Marcus whispered. It was a sound of pure denial. "No, no. I saw the fire. I saw the body." Liam took a step forward. "You saw what you wanted to see, Marcus." "You are a ghost," Marcus stammered, backing away until he bumped into the side of the Bronco. "You are dead. I killed you. We killed you." "I am very much alive," Liam said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the chaos like a laser. "And I am here to collect the debt." Suddenly, the side door of the garage, the one the thugs had picked earlier, burst open. "Marcus!" a voice shrieked. "What is happening? I heard gunshots." It was Sarah. She had been waiting in the Mercedes, unable to resist the urge to oversee the destruction of my life. She stumbled into the garage, her expensive heels clicking on the concrete, her face a mask of panic. She stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at the thugs pinned against the wall. She looked at Marcus, who was cowering against the truck, looking like he was about to vomit. And then she looked at the man standing in the center of the room. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. She brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a scream that never came. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the dirty floor, ruining her designer dress in a puddle of hydraulic fluid. "Liam!" She gasped the name barely more than a breath. "Baby." Liam turned his head slowly to look at his wife. There was no love in his eyes. There was no anger. There was only the clinical detachment of an engineer looking at a broken, useless component. "Hello, Sarah," Liam said. "Sorry I didn't die according to your plan. The schedule changed." It can't be," she sobbed, crawling backward away from him. "We buried you. We mourned you. You mourned the money, Liam corrected her. You mourned the inconvenience of having to wait for the insurance payout. Marcus seemed to snap out of his trance. The reality of the situation crashed down on him, the failed murder, the fraud, the prison sentence waiting for him. Desperation, wild and animalistic, took over. He lunged for the gun he had dropped. "Don't do it, Marcus!" I shouted from the balcony. But he didn't listen. He scrambled for the weapon, his fingers brushing the grip. Liam didn't flinch. He didn't run. He simply raised the taser and pulled the trigger. Pop hiss. 2 probes shot out, trailing thin copper wires. They hit Marcus square in the chest. The effect was instantaneous. Marcus stiffened as 50,000 volts of electricity locked every muscle in his body. He convulsed his eyes, rolling back in his head, and collapsed onto the floor in a twitching heap miles away from the gun. "Secure," Liam said calmly. I moved. I vaulted over the railing of the landing, ignoring the protest in my 72-year-old knees, and landed in a crouch on the garage floor. I stood up and pulled the master remote from my pocket. I pressed the red button. The heavy steel shutters I had installed over the garage windows, hidden inside the walls, until this moment slammed down with a series of loud clangs. The magnetic locks on the side door engaged with a final thud. The main garage door remained sealed. We were locked in. They were locked in. "Nobody leaves," I announced. "The facility is in lockdown." Sarah was weeping hysterically now, curled into a ball on the floor. The thugs were groaning, trying to push the Land Rover off them, but the brakes were set. Marcus was gasping for air, recovering from the shock, his limbs still twitching. And then the sound I had been waiting for cut through the night air outside. Whoop whoop, wee-oo wee-oo, sirens. Lots of them, growing louder by the second. I walked over to Marcus. He was trying to push himself up, his eyes wild with hate and fear. He looked at me, then at the gun lying 5 feet away. He made one last desperate lunge for it. "I will kill you all," he screamed. "He was fast, I will give him that. Younger, stronger." But he was fighting with rage. I was fighting with leverage. As he lunged, I stepped into his space. I didn't try to outmuscle him. I used the momentum of his own body against him. I caught his outstretched arm, twisted the wrist to lock the joint, and drove my shoulder into his armpit. It was a technique I had learned 40 years ago in a self-defense course for security couriers. Control the limb, control the body. Marcus yelped as his arm was wrenched behind his back. I swept his leg, and he went down face first onto the concrete with a sickening smack. I dropped my knee onto his spine, pinning him to the floor. I grabbed his other hand and crossed it over the first, applying pressure until he cried out in pain. "Stay down," I growled. "Get off me, you old freak," Marcus spat, thrashing against my weight. "You can't hold me. I have the best lawyers in the city." "Lawyers can't help you when you break into a secure vault, Marcus," I said, leaning close to his ear so he could hear the grit in my voice. "And make no mistake, this house is a vault." The blue and red lights of the police cruisers began to flash through the gaps in the shutter slats, painting the garage in a strobing disco of justice. I could hear heavy boots running up the driveway, voices shouting commands. "Police, open up, we have the building surrounded." I looked up at Liam. He was standing over Sarah, not touching her, just watching her weep. He looked at me and nodded. A silent communication between father and son. Mission accomplished. I looked back down at Marcus, who was still struggling, still trying to find a way out, still believing he could talk or fight his way out of this trap. "You made one mistake, Marcus," I whispered, tightening my grip on his wrists until his fingers turned white. "What?" He wheezed, his face pressed against the oil-stained floor. "You thought you were just stealing a truck," I said. "But you were trying to pick a lock that I designed." I leaned in closer, letting the words sink in. "Don't ever underestimate a locksmith's son. We don't just know how to open doors. We know exactly how to close every single escape route you have." "Open the door!" the police shouted from outside, pounding on the metal. "Liam," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "Let them in!" Liam walked to the wall switch. He looked at the chaos, one last time, the pinned thugs, the weeping wife, the broken lawyer. He hit the button. The garage door began to roll up slowly, revealing a wall of blinding blue lights and a dozen police officers with weapons drawn. I didn't let go of Marcus. I held him there pinned and helpless, offering him up to justice like a package I had personally wrapped and delivered. "Delivery complete," I said to myself. And as the officers rushed in, shouting for everyone to get on the ground, I finally allowed myself to smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the satisfied, grim smile of a man who had protected his own. Self-preservation was messy. It was violent. But tonight, it was absolute. The moment the police officers swarmed into my garage was a chaotic blur of blue uniforms, shouting voices, and the metallic click of handcuffs. It was the sound of a system finally working the way it was designed to work. I stayed on top of Marcus, keeping his face pressed against the cold concrete, until Officer Miller, a man I had known from the neighborhood beat for 10 years, tapped me on the shoulder. "We have got him, Joseph," Miller said, his voice firm but gentle. "You can let go now. We have got him." I released the pressure on Marcus's arm and stood up, my joints popping in protest. 2 officers hauled Marcus to his feet. He was bleeding from a cut on his lip where he had hit the floor, and his expensive jacket was ruined with oil and grime. He looked wild, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. He started screaming about entrapment, about illegal surveillance, spewing legal jargon that meant nothing when you are caught red-handed with a weapon in a break-in. But it was Sarah who made the scene truly pathetic. As an officer pulled her up from the floor, the mask of the grieving widow dissolved completely. She did not look at me. She did not look at the husband she had tried to murder. She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus. "It was him!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "He forced me to do it. I was afraid of him. He said he would kill me if I didn't help him, Liam. Baby, please tell them. You know I would never hurt you." I looked at my son. Liam was standing near the front of the truck, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had built a life with, the woman who had plotted to cut his brake lines and throw me into a state-run nursing home to rot. He did not scream at her. He did not cry. He simply looked at her with a profound, crushing pity. It was the look you give to a rabid animal before you put it down. Not hatred, just a sad recognition that it is too broken to be saved. "Save it for the jury, Sarah," Liam said quietly. "The audio recordings don't lie. I heard you laugh when you planned my funeral." Sarah's mouth snapped shut. The realization hit her that there was no way out. Her shoulders slumped, and she let the officer lead her away, her head hanging low, defeated not by force, but by the absolute weight of the truth. As they dragged Marcus past me, he locked eyes with me one last time. "You are just a lucky old man," he spat. "You should be dead." I looked him in the eye, feeling a calmness I hadn't felt in months. "Luck had nothing to do with it, Marcus. You just forgot to check the schematics. You tried to break into a fortress with a crowbar." The detectives stayed for hours. I showed them the hidden compartment in the chassis. I handed over the lead-encased hard drive, the physical evidence that contained the source code for the Sentinel protocol, and the wire transfer records. When the lead detective, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Vance, saw the extent of the evidence Liam had gathered, she just shook her head. "This is not just a murder plot," she said, holding the heavy drive. "This is a matter of national security. You two didn't just save yourselves. You probably saved half the banking system in North America." "We just wanted to fix a leak," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Just doing maintenance." The months that followed were a slow, grinding process of legal gears turning. But unlike the terrifying speed of the assault, this was a satisfying grind. It was the sound of justice being manufactured. The trial of the century, as the local papers called it, took place in a federal courthouse downtown. I sat in the front row every single day, wearing my best suit, the one I had worn to my wife's funeral. Liam sat beside me, clean-shaven, wearing a suit that fit him, looking every inch the CEO he was. The evidence was overwhelming. The defense attorneys tried to argue that the recordings were inadmissible, that the fake death was a form of fraud that nullified Liam's credibility. But the judge was having none of it. When the prosecution played the tape of Sarah and Marcus discussing how to dispose of me, referring to me as a useless eater, the courtroom went so silent, you could hear the ventilation system humming. I saw the jury's faces. They looked at Sarah and Marcus not as business titans, but as monsters. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, economic espionage, wire fraud. The list of charges was longer than the receipt for a full engine rebuild. The judge sentenced them to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As the gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot, I felt a heavy weight lift off my chest. It wasn't happiness. You are never happy that someone you trusted turned out to be evil. It was relief. It was the feeling of finally closing a heavy vault door and spinning the dial, knowing that the danger was locked away forever. Liam took back control of Nexus Logic the following week. It was a bloodbath in the boardroom. He fired every executive who had been complicit with Marcus, every yes man who had looked the other way. He stripped the company down to its studs and started rebuilding it with a new code of ethics. He implemented transparency protocols that would make ironclad security jealous. But the real work, the work that mattered to me, happened in my garage. Spring had arrived in Chicago. The snow melted, revealing the green shoots of grass on the lawn that Mrs. Henderson had so kindly watered. And inside the garage, the 1996 Ford Bronco sat on jack stands, stripped down to its metal bones. Liam and I spent every weekend there. We didn't rush. We weren't fixing it to sell it anymore. We were fixing it to keep it. We sanded every inch of the body, removing the rust that Sarah had mocked. We cut out the rot and welded in fresh steel. I taught Liam how to mix body filler, how to feather the edges so the repair was invisible. He taught me how to upgrade the engine management system, how to install a modern fuel injection unit that would make the truck run smoother than it ever did in the 90s. It was during one of these long Saturday afternoons that the conversation finally happened. I was under the hood, tightening the bolts on the new alternator. Liam was polishing the chrome bumper, his reflection distorted in the shining metal. "Dad," he asked, not looking up from his work. "Yeah, son. Do you hate them?" I paused, the wrench heavy in my hand. I knew who he meant. Sarah, Marcus, the people who had tried to destroy us. I wiped a smudge of grease from my cheek and stood up, leaning against the fender. I looked at my son. He looked healthier now. The shadows under his eyes were gone. He looked like the boy who used to fish with me, but with a new layer of steel in his spine. "Hate is a tricky thing, Liam," I said thoughtfully. "It feels like fuel. It burns hot and it makes you move fast. But it is dirty fuel. It clogs the injectors. It corrodes the lines." I picked up a piece of rusted metal we had cut off the truck earlier that day. It was jagged orange and brittle. "Hate is like rust," I said, turning the piece over in my hands. "If you let it sit, it eats you. It weakens your frame until you snap under pressure. I don't hate them, Liam. Hate requires energy. It requires me to keep them in my mind, to keep feeding them my time and my thoughts." I tossed the rusted metal into the trash bin. It landed with a hollow clang. "I removed them," I said. "Just like we removed that bad steel. They were defective parts in the machine of our lives. You don't hate a broken alternator, son. You replace it. You throw the old one on the scrap pile and you move on. You make the machine run better without it." Liam stopped polishing. He looked at the trash bin, then at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Maintenance," he said. Exactly, I nodded. Preventative maintenance. Now hand me that torquey wrench. This bolt isn't going to tighten itself. We finished the truck in late June. We painted it a deep, midnight blue, a color that looked black in the shadows but sparkled like a sapphire in the sun. It didn't look like a rich man's toy. It looked like a working machine, tough, capable, and unbreakable. On the day we finished, I stood in front of the grill admiring our work. The chrome shone. The panel gaps were perfect. The engine idled with a low, menacing rumble that vibrated in the soles of my boots. I looked directly at you, the person listening to this story right now. Yes, you. The world tells you to be kind. It tells you to turn the other cheek. And for the most part, that is good advice. But the world is also a brutal place. It is a machine that grinds people down. I learned a lesson in that garage holding a revolver while my son hacked a security system. It is a lesson I want you to carry with you. Self-preservation is not selfishness. There are people in this life. Sometimes people you love, sometimes people you share a name with who will look at your value and see only what they can strip for parts. They will look at your kindness and see weakness. They will look at your trust and see an open door. When you see the rust forming, when you hear the engine knocking, do not ignore it. Do not pretend it will go away if you are just nice enough. You have a responsibility to the life you were given. You have a duty to protect your peace, your safety, and your legacy. Protecting yourself is the highest form of respect for the parents who raised you and the God who made you. So check your locks, watch your blind spots, and never ever hand the keys to your life to someone who hasn't earned the right to drive it. And remember, sometimes the things that look old and worn out like an old truck or an old man are the only things strong enough to save you when the road gets rough. Ready to go, Dad, Liam called from the driver's seat. He was wearing sunglasses, his arm resting on the open window frame. He looked free. I was born ready, I said. I climbed into the passenger seat. The leather was new, smelling of quality and hard work. I slammed the door. It closed with a solid, reassuring thud, the sound of a vault sealing shut. Liam put the Bronco in gear. We rolled out of the driveway past the house that was no longer a prison, past Mrs. Henderson waving from her garden and onto the street. We hit the highway as the sun was beginning to set, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of fire and gold. Liam stepped on the gas. The engine roared a deep, throat-clearing sound of power. The wind rushed through the open windows, carrying away the last ghosts of the past. We didn't know exactly where we were going. Maybe back to Montana to fish. Maybe to the coast. It didn't matter. The destination wasn't the point. The point was that we were driving. We were moving forward. We were alive. And as I watched the mile markers fly by, listening to the synchronized rhythm of the engine and my own heartbeat, I knew one thing for sure. We had been broken, but we had rebuilt ourselves. And this time, we were built to last. Thank you so much for listening to our story of betrayal, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a garage in Detroit, a commute in London, or maybe a quiet room in Sydney? Please drop your location in the comments below and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to cut rust out of your life to save yourself? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more true tales of karma and justice, please make sure to subscribe to the Bittersweet Revenge channel. Hit that like button to help us grow and smash the hype button to support our work, so this story can reach even more people who might need to hear this message. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and keep your engines running.